Marino. The Rules Committee will come to order. Welcome back to everyone. I hope everyone had a great August, and we have an action-packed couple of weeks, and we're going to be meeting today and day after tomorrow. We're going to be meeting on the continuing resolution, and so again, we will need the attention of everybody here as we begin with consideration of 5949, which is the Judiciary Committee and Intelligence Committee's FISA Amendments Reauthorization Act. We're happy to, from the Committee on Judiciary, welcome Mr. Marino, and I see from the Select Committee on Intelligence, the ranking member, Mr. Rippersberger. So why don't the two of you come forward, gentlemen, and nice to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's begin with the Judiciary Committee. Mr. Marino, thanks, welcome. How many times have you been to the Rules Committee? Once. That's today. Yeah. I thought I hadn't seen you before up here, so welcome. And you will live to tell about it, unless you have to contend with Mr. McGovern, but we'll do what we can to tamp down the threat that McGovern may impose on you. So please, without objection, any prepared statement that you might have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we welcome your summary.
Okay. Since my statements are the full statement will be in the record, I'm going to just focus on 4 quick points and get to the questions if you have any for me. This is a bipartisan bill that does an effective job on protecting the security of this country. Even the President wants this for a 5-year period, and there's been offered classified meetings to go over in detail for those that have not been to the hearings. And there's a significant process that this bill went through in markup on both sides, and it was bipartisan cooperation. That's my statement, and let's get to the questions.
Sure. Well, from an intelligence perspective first, our opinion, we must reauthorize the critical piece of legislation to keep America and her citizens safe. The FISA Amendments Act allows the government to gain important intelligence about terrorists, cyber threats, weapons of mass destruction, and nuclear weapons proliferation that threaten our U.S. interests. The FISA Amendments Act gives the U.S. government the authority, and this is important, to collect the intelligence information about foreigners located outside of the United States. It prohibits the targeting of an American citizen or U.S. permanent residents without a court order, no matter where they are located. There are those members of Congress that are concerned about oversight. The FISA Amendments Act is subjected to extensive oversight by the executive branch and also by Congress. In this Congress alone, the House Intelligence Committee has held multiple hearings, briefings, and more than a dozen meetings. Every 60 days, the Department of Justice and the Director of National Intelligence conduct detailed on-site reviews to ensure compliance with the provisions of the Act. This is a bipartisan bill that passed out of the House Intelligence Committee by the unanimous vote of 17-0. And I believe it's important that the FISA Amendment Act be authorized for 5 years. This gives the intelligence community consistency and takes politics out of the process by taking it out of a presidential election year. The administration specifically requested a 5-year reauthorization. Without reauthorization, this critical tool would be lost and put our nation at risk. We would not be able to obtain the foreign intelligence necessary to prevent terrorist plots and cut off their success of financial support. I believe the FISA Amendments Act is critical to protecting our nation while also protecting the constitutional rights of our Americans.
Well, thank you both very much, and let me just say that we appreciate the brevity of your statement here, and speaking on behalf of the Rules Committee, Mr. Marino, and I will tell you that this is an important issue. Of course, it brings back, for me, the memory of September 11th, and as we do this on the eve of September 11th, thinking about everything that we have gone through. And one of the things that I believe is very important is for us to continue to underscore a look back at all of these issues. And I think that a 5-year period of time for the extension of something that has been has worked well. I mean, I consider myself, I call myself a small libertarian-leaning Republican. I mean, we obviously want to ensure everyone's rights, and there are some sacrifices that do need to be made, and I think that this is a compromise which has been worked out before, and it's basically an extension of that, and so we appreciate your work and hope we'll be able to move this expeditiously through the floor. Mr. Sessions.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I want to thank both of you for being here. I'm as the chairman is very thankful that it's being done without a battle between each other, which is an indication that both of you have not only done your best but made sure that others were involved also. So I was reminded by watching National Geographic last night of what happened.
National Geographic?
Got to start somewhere, Mr. Chairman, got to start somewhere. And I watched National Geographic last night and the night before and was reminded about the horrors of the day. One thing I had not seen before, and it's just very interesting, is that there was a Muslim man who was face down in the rubble, and he was saved by an Israeli man or a Jewish man. And they looked at the camera, both of them, and said, "This is a horrible day, but whether you're a Muslim or a Jewish, I don't know if he's from Israel, but he was Jewish. It was a day that they worked together to save the country and each other." And I'm reminded that on a regular basis that we need to make sure we protect this country because so many innocent people are at risk if we don't do every single thing we could. And we can look back all we want, and I think we should, because those that don't understand history, it will repeat itself. But I think that our ability to work together here on these important issues makes a world of difference to a lot of people. So look forward to knowing more about what the agreements are in the bill, and I appreciate that. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the statement of Representative Bobby Scott, the statement of Representative Jerry Nadler, and the statement of Representative John Conyers.
Without objection, statements from Mr.
Thank you very much. And I too appreciate your work, and I certainly agree with my colleague from Texas that we all want to make sure that the American people are protected. We also want to make sure that the liberties of the American people are protected as well. And I know Mr. Conyers tried to offer an amendment in the Judiciary Committee that would have sunsetted the FISA provision to 3 years instead of 5 years. I think it was defeated, and I know Representative Schakowsky and Representative Scott offered amendments, as well as Mr. Nadler and Ms. Lee, both in Intelligence and in Judiciary Committee. And without getting into the substance of whether it should be sunsetted at 3 years or not, nonetheless, I think there are some compelling arguments, that could be made that it's important that not only the Intelligence Committee do their oversight, but the Judiciary Committee do their oversight and as much transparency as possible. And I guess in that spirit, I would just ask whether any of you would be opposed to allowing there to be some amendments offered to this on the floor, so that Mr. Conyers, and I think there may be other amendments here, would have the opportunity to be able to offer them on the floor, so that the entire House can have an opportunity to be able to debate and to vote on them.
The bill was fully vetted in both committees. It went through rigorous discussion. It passed overwhelmingly. But let me just give you two issues from a law enforcement perspective. I was a prosecutor for 19 years. I was a district attorney for 12 years. I was a U.S. attorney for 7 years. And first of all, this 3-year reauthorization that was posited, it's shorter than the original 4-year term. But equally more important is that law enforcement operates, the Intelligence Committee operates on a long-term basis, long-term meaning 5 years, given the fact that it needs continuity. Many of these investigations go on for a very long period of time. One rock is turned over, something else comes to the surface, and the continuity of a 5-year is logical based on my experience in law enforcement. I've actually used the FISA numerous times as a U.S. prosecutor, and no one is more cognizant and out front when it comes to individual rights. So speaking from experience and talking with people in the Intelligence Committee, the intelligence agencies, that the work is so complex and so critical and takes such a long period of time, I think 3 years would be a hindrance.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, but there are a number of provisions of the Patriot Act that are also have a 3-year sunset provision. And again, I'm not getting into who's right on this thing. I mean, clearly Mr. Conyers, who's the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, who's been involved in these issues for a long time, raises an interesting point. Maybe the House defeats him overwhelmingly on this, or maybe not. But I guess all my question was, is there any problem with him being able to allow his amendment on the House floor? That's all.
Well, the issue there is going to be pursuant to the Rules Committee and what you do. First thing, let me say, I think it's very positive that we're here talking about the issue of how long we go before sunset. Because this bill and the FISA amendment bill was pretty controversial, and there's a lot of information out there that's just not correct. And I think now that the people involved in the process realize that the bill is clear, and it's clear that it prohibits targeting of American citizens anywhere in the world, not only the United States. Also, the fact that this is a FISA, this is foreign. This really doesn't have to deal with what we're doing in the United States. We have Patriot Act and other issues. So most of those issues have been resolved. Now it's just a matter of accountability. When I made my statement, we talked about the fact that we have oversight. We have the House oversight, the administration. We have independence, and we're doing this on a regular basis. And I think the most important thing of the time period is to take the politics out of it, take it out of an election year, do what's right for our country to protect our country, yet maintain our constitutional rights. Now, the President just issued a SAP at 5 o'clock on this, and his statement of the administration basically said, quote, strongly supporting reauthorization of the FISA Amendment Act for a 5-year period. So that's the administration, and that's my position, and I think the 5 years was a compromise, because at one time we were negotiating from 9 years to 3 years.
Gentleman yields.
5. Yeah.
I thank my friend for yielding. Let me just say, first of all, I'd like to enter the statement of administration policy into the record without objection. It'll appear in the record. And, when this issue came up at the outset, I was very skeptical about long-term extensions. And so I share the concern that has been raised, but as the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee has just said, there's going to be continued oversight that is going to take place, because that's really our goal here, is to ensure that when we take the FISA authority that exists, it is not going to undermine the rights of our fellow Americans. And so I think that this strikes a balance that is necessary now. And again, we saw, I guess there were 11 votes in opposition, the Judiciary Committee, and in the Intelligence Committee it was a unanimous vote. Is that not right? Was it a unanimous vote?
Yes, it was.
That's what I saw in the report here. So it seems to me that while we share the concerns, and I've talked to Mr. Conyers about this in the past, I do think that this is a reasonable compromise, and I'm very happy that President Obama is supportive of this. And I thank my friend for yielding.
And I usually agree with President Obama on most things, but I don't agree with him on
I
everything.
I don't.
But I guess the whole point I'm trying to make is that the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, a thoughtful member of this Congress, has some concerns. And all I was seeking was a reply as to whether or not anybody had any objection if he got to offer his amendment on the floor, so that we could debate it, and if it goes down in flames and you win, so what? I mean, that's all I was looking for, is whether or not you would have any objection if we allowed some of these thoughtful members who care about this issue, some on the committees of jurisdiction, have an opportunity to offer their amendments.
Gentlemen, and he's going to leave it up to us, I think, is what he said.
Personally,
that's a bad idea. No.
It's a great idea.
No, that's the law.
Best answer I've heard from
that's the law, and I'm a
time.
practical person. I think you're in the majority, correct? And you'll have the vote, so I assume that's where it's coming down. Let me say that sunsets are important.
Good observation there, Dutch.
It's end game. But the bottom line is that sunsets are important for accountability, especially dealing with constitutional rights. I don't have a problem with sunsets, 3 years, whatever. But what I do have a problem are sunsets that are being used politically, whether either side of the party. And in a presidential year, I've been here long enough to see that either side of the aisle can be involved in politics. So I'm really happy, and I think the administration is too, that we were able to compromise, because I think in the beginning they were at 9, we were at 3, and that's kind of where.
I'll just say one thing. I don't think this is about politics. I mean, I'm a big supporter of the president's, but I have some concern. I tend to be with Congressman Conyers on this. And, so and I don't think his motivation is politics in a presidential year. But there are people who have some concerns, and I guess I'm not getting an answer, but the deal was I think they ought to have an opportunity to be able to offer their views, not just in the committee, but on the floor. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Let me just say, I think Mr. Ruppersberger has provided the answer in saying that the President supports a 5-year extension. He believes that the oversight that the Intelligence Committee is going to offer will deal with the concerns that Mr. Conyer has, which I, in fact, share.
But the ranking member does not share your concerns, otherwise he would not offer.
No, he shares the concerns.
He shares your,
I have a belief that we've got to have a way to deal with it.
His concerns are deep.
Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both the gentlemen for coming today. I particularly appreciate the ranking members pointing out that this only applies to foreigners and that we are very carefully excluding Americans from this because I'm sure we're all going to get emails related to it.
It prohibits the targeting of Americans unless you have a court order.
Correct, a court order. And I want to say that when I saw the Statement of Administration Policy, I was going to offer it into the record because I think it's a rare. No, I would not ever try to preempt the chairman, but I think that it is an important thing that the administration understands the importance of this legislation, that it passed the committee 17-0. I appreciate all the positive things that you all have said about it, and I think it's time to move on, and I appreciate the good work that you've done. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hastings.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Woodall. Welcome back. Nice haircut. Mr. Paulus.
Yeah, I think it was mentioned earlier that this applies to, does not apply to domestic wiretapping, international, but it's my understanding that when there's ambiguity about the target, in fact, if there's uncertainty about the location of either the sender or the recipient, then it's assumed to be allowable under this. There doesn't need to be, it's my understanding, any evidence or proof or any burden to show that these are, in fact, non-domestic. So it seems like there's a huge opening for what might be termed incidental domestic wiretapping, but as long as somebody has some belief that either the sender or recipient may be overseas, it seems like a pretty big hole. Is there any?
Yeah, I would like to respond to that because I think, we have a vast amount of information. Elsie, from being on the committee, you see that. And what happens, we're targeting on an individual, usually someone involved in Al-Qaeda or whatever we need to do. If that person who we are targeting on has a conversation with an American citizen, okay, then if we want to target that American citizen, we have to go and get a court order. Now, there are occasions where it's more like the X's and zeros and ones and twos and that type thing, because that we're not allowed. If we feel that this American citizen is involved in any way, then we have to go back and get a court order.
But unless you know for sure, if there's any doubt about whether it's an American citizen or not, it's my understanding the assumption is they would be treated like they were not an American citizen and it would be treated as overseas wiretapping.
No, because first thing, if they're overseas, we're picking up a conversation with someone else. That's our target. And we're on that target because we feel they're a terrorist. If you're talking about the United States, though, that's an entirely different issue because then that we lose the jurisdiction. This is foreign. That's one of the things that's important to know. This is FISA. This is foreign. Now, when it comes to the United States, then all of a sudden it comes under a different authorization. It goes to the FBI. It goes to any state agency that is here at this time.
One or both of the participants in the conversation are foreign.
Pardon?
One or both of the participants in the conversation in this case are foreign.
If they're both foreign, then there's not an issue. If it's a United States citizen, it becomes an issue. If we then want to go target that individual, we have to get a court order in that regard.
And how is it determined whether somebody is, in fact, domestic or international for purposes of applying which?
Well, you're getting into sources and methods right now. The bottom line is that, if it's determined, and we have ways of determining through what the conversation says, or if that phone happens to be in the name of an American, that is usually where it is. But I don't want to go further in there because, we do this on a regular basis. Remember, we are there attempting to protect the United States citizens from terrorist attacks. And we are doing whatever we can, believe me, on both sides of the aisle to make sure that our laws are in place that will protect the privacy and the constitutional rights. And those laws are strong, and they're there. Now, there will always be mistakes. I don't think anybody can guarantee you, but we can guarantee you that we try to do the best, or that our government is doing the best we can to protect the constitutional rights of our citizens.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem with this is while we set, of course, this in motion, there needs to be the proper judicial oversight. And in this particular version, there's a very limited role for the FISA court, rather than looking at individualized applications of surveillance that only looks at the methodology of targeting and minimization. I would like to see, again, given the broad powers given, additional judicial oversight.
You're saying that it's only looking at procedures. If the FISA court is going to be involved with an American citizen, there's got to be more than just procedural issues. I mean, there has to be a test on how or why this person is involved. It's not to the same extent that you might do an affidavit for a wiretap in the United States, but they're getting information. If it's an American citizen, the rules change if that person becomes a target. So that last question that you gave me, I don't think that's the case at all. We take it very seriously, and we also have the checks and balances of other people, including to make sure that we follow the law and the intelligence community follows the law wherever we go.
Well, the gentleman yield.
Happy to yield.
And let me just say again, I think that this line of questioning is very indicative of the fact that there will be questions raised from the first branch of government if issues like this come to the forefront by Mr. Conyers and certainly by members of the Intelligence Committee who are raising it. So I think that I see the Congress itself as an institution, as one of the tools to ensure that we're not undermining the civil liberties of our fellow Americans. I thank my friend for yielding.
And along those lines, if I may, then, has there been or will there be the opportunity for members to receive a classified briefing on the use of FISA so that we can properly execute?
We have a process that if we're going to give classified information, you apply and then we vote, and then when members want to come in and get information, then it goes before the whole committee, and then we vote at the whole committee on whether we give that information.
Is there a way that we could arrange for, I know we've had classified briefings from your committee on a number of topics. Is it possible to arrange for a classified briefing for members?
Well, as I said before, yes, there is, but it has to go through a process that we have on the committee, and if you come to me, I will work with you to try to see if we can do that.
The key point being,
I don't make that final decision.
Well, the key point being, well, as an individual member, I would, before making a decision, of course, want to be privy to how these powers were used. I think it's important for other members of Congress as well, not just me. So I would hope that this is not just some document I can see. I think that this is important enough where, again, the chair said that we are part of that oversight as Congress. Absent access to the classified information, there's no meaningful way that non-members of the committee can engage in oversight of the intelligence community.
Oh, there is.
How can we engage in oversight without access with the classified information?
I'm not saying you're not getting it. I'm just saying there's a process to do this.
Right.
And you let me know, and we'll start working the process for you.
Right. For us
but
to
the problem
properly
is that we're going to the floor tomorrow, and that's a different issue. But this issue has been out there for a period of time.
Yeah.
And by the way, I want to say this too, with Mr. McGovern, that I have been working with the administration on this issue that you raised about the 9 years or 5 years or whatever. So this is not just our committee. This is working with the administration as we do on everything, and hopefully a bipartisan way. If there's one committee that needs to be bipartisan for what is at stake, it's got to be this committee, because we have so much at threat, not only civil liberties and privacy rights, constitutional rights, but also our national security.
Well, again, I'll be yielding back to the chair in a moment, but as the chair indicated, if Congress itself is part of this critical oversight role in addition to the FISA courts, it's very important that information about how these powers are used be available to members.
And let me respond to that. The reason the Intelligence Committee was created, because there is so much that is out there that's classified, that if it got out in the public, we have had problems with leak, it could hurt our national security. The sources of messes, and there have been a lot of leaks out there. So that's why this committee was created, to get this classified information. But there are ways and mechanisms for you to get this information, but there's a process and procedure, and I will work with you in that regard.
Thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Mr. Scott. Thank you, Mr. Webster. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for being here, and we'll look forward to considering the measure on the floor tomorrow. Good job, Mr. Marino, for your first appearance before the Rules Committee.
Pleasure.
Now, we are very happy to welcome our former Rules Committee colleague, the distinguished chair of the Committee on Natural Resources, Mr. Hastings. Wonderful to have you back. And I see Mr. Grijalva, your colleague, is here, and I also see Ms. McCullum is here. So do you mind if she comes up to the table? Even if you mind, I'm going to insist that she do come to the table, even if you're going to complain about it. Why don't you sit right between these two characters here, Betty. Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, thanks for joining us. And without objection, as you know, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we welcome your summary.
I will be brief. H.R. 5544, the Minnesota Education, Investment, and Employment Act, that's authored by our colleague from Minnesota, Mr. Kovac, provides for a land exchange of Minnesota trust lands for multiple-use national forest lands. When Minnesota became a state, it retained a number of parcels of school trust lands that were specifically dedicated for sale and development to provide funding for Minnesota public schools. When Congress designated the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness Act in 1978, a portion of these school trust lands became trapped in the wilderness area and inaccessible for economic development that benefits the schools. The land exchange in this bill would provide a much-needed solution by allowing the state to start putting land back to productive use for schools. Revenues from these lands will increase the school trust, which will increase funding for every school in the state. And this bill has local support, and what it would do is execute bipartisan legislative plan that was not only passed bipartisanly in the Minnesota legislature, but signed by the Democrat governor of Minnesota, Governor Dayton. I'll happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hastings. Good job. Mr. Grijalva.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Federal land grants to states, homesteaders, railroads, mines, universities, and others over the last 150 years have resulted in a very challenging and fragmented pattern of land ownership, not just in Minnesota, in my home state of Arizona, and across the country. And so consolidation of land ownership would benefit the federal government as well as states and local communities. That is why Congress has passed laws authorizing federal land management agencies like the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service to conduct land exchanges themselves, as long as those exchanges are in the long-term interest of the American taxpayers. As a result, the only reason to come to Congress seeking special legislation to mandate a special land deal is if the proponents are trying to circumvent the safeguards already included in the law. That is certainly the case of H.R. 5544. While the state lands to be traded are identified, the legislation fails to specify which federal forest acres would be given to the state, leaving open the danger that lands critical to protecting the quality drinking water or vital to hunting or motorized recreation will have to be turned over to the state for mining, logging, or other developments. 3 Native American tribes have treaties guaranteeing tribal members the right to hunt, fish, and gather in the Superior National Forest. This bill potentially deprives these tribes of their access right. The legislation also includes an unusual provision requiring that the appraisals of these parcels be conducted under Minnesota law, rather than through an objective third-party appraisal process as required under current law. This is like buying a house based on the appraisal provided by the owner. Such a scheme fails to protect the interest of the American taxpayers who own these lands. H.R. 5544 also exempts this exchange from public notice and comment, leaving the public no opportunity to evaluate or address any of these concerns. In addition to the bill's flaws, it is important to note that the legislation would result in a $6 million in mandatory spending flowing to Mr. Carvac's constituents. Not only does this violate PAYGO, but it is also an earmark, something that the majority opposes. H.R. 5544 will mandate a land deal that will benefit one party, Mr. Carvac's constituents, over the other party, the American taxpayers, and in my district, in your districts, and across the country. The bill will accomplish this land deal in a way that violates our budget rules and the ban on earmarks. I urge the committee to shelve the consideration of H.R. 5544 in favor of more pressing and more equitable legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I am from the state of Minnesota, and I served on the State Natural Resources Committee. And as Chairman Hastings pointed out, the state has agreed on moving forward on this land, but the state is currently working on the land exchange, the map, and the evaluation process. So the state is moving forward on this. This isn't anything where the state isn't going to be moving forward, but the state has not drawn up the maps or the exchange value. And this brings me to my amendment focused on one area. The lands that could be included as any part of an exchange under H.R. 5544 are within the seceded or sold in the 1954 treaty with the Chippewa. The terms of that treaty guarantee tribal nations continuing hunting, fishing, and gathering and other use of the land. And the tribes have been included in part of all the discussions that have taken place within the state of Minnesota, but they want to be there when the maps are being drawn. They want to be there when the land values are discussed. This legislation jumps over it. In its current form, this bill completely ignores the treaty rights of those tribal nations, which include the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, the Bois Forte Band of Chippewa, and the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior Chippewa. The Tribal Council of Grand Portage has contacted my office in opposition to the bill. Chairwoman Karen Diver of Fond du Lac has sent letters in opposition to Governor Dayton, Secretary Vilsack, Senators Franken and Klobuchar, and to Representative Kravac. The tribes foresee a negative impact on this bill to guarantee their treaty rights for use of the land. And I want to stress again, back home in Minnesota, everybody's sitting at the table. The governor's already signed something. People are working together on the maps. This jumps over that. It's hard to believe that the authors of this bill could consider the exchange of 68,000 acres of land with the uses governed by federal treaty and sovereign tribal nations to be anything less than a major federal action. Yet this bill explicitly denies that level of consideration for this exchange. The amendment that I'm introducing would recognize the reserved hunting, fishing, and gathering rights of the tribes and the lands under consideration and ensure that they are not adversely impacted by any exchange. The language for this amendment was done in consultation with legal representation from the tribes from Bois Forte, Grand Portage, and Fond du Lac, as well as the Great Lakes Indian Fishing and Wildlife Commission. While this amendment will not solve the fundamental problems of this bill, as I will not vote for this bill, even if this amendment goes forward, it is important that we respond to the threat against tribal interests and tribal sovereignty that this bill contains. It doesn't change the fact that this bill does circumvent and establish procedures for land transfers, but it would at least allow for the process for tribal voices to be heard. And, Mr. Chair, I have for the record here a copy from the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Chippewa that was sent on May 30th, 2012 to the Honorable Mark.
Without objection, we'll include that and any other information that you have in the record. And let me say to both of you, I'm going to encourage this committee to make your amendment in order. I'm going to encourage this committee to make your amendment in order. And I'm going to encourage this committee to make the other two Democratic amendments made in order. And over my better judgment, I'm also going to encourage them to make the Hastings amendment in order. But I think that we may be able to work through that within the rule. And so I understand that there is concern, but these four Democratic amendments have been submitted to us, and so I think that it would be the right thing for us to allow a full debate on those.
Mr. Chairman, my office has reached out to Mr. Cole's office. Mm-hmm. This came up on short notice. We've both been out, and so I hope to have a conversation. And I'm going to work really hard to get Mr. Cole's office. I have other reasons why I oppose this bill, but the tribal sovereignty issue should be one which we can stand together.
Well, that's why we'll include this in the record, and we'd very much appreciate you doing that. But I have no questions other than to say that we look forward to doing this. Just hold tight. We may have some questions from some of my colleagues here. Mr. Sessions, any questions?
No, except to say that we are obviously want to make sure that tribal sovereignty is looked at. And so I appreciate that. And with that said, I happen to have great confidence in the chairman of the committee, who I believe also has many of these same ideas about not just fair play, but the right thing to do. And so I do appreciate both of you being here and appearing with the chairman. By the way, the chairman today helped me a lot on the floor with another piece of legislation, zebra mussel. issue, which is a very contentious and difficult issue also that's being held and sponsored on a bipartisan basis on the floor, which is another indication of the kind of work that the gentleman, Mr. Hastings, does on all of our behalf, and I want to congratulate him.
I wasn't aware of it, but I'll congratulate you.
I'm not going to say I was surprised.
Followed it that closely.
But I was very pleased, and once again, it goes back to the kind of respect and the way the gentleman, Mr. Hastings, conducts himself.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGovern.
Well, thank you. And Ms. McCollum just referred to the fact that this is our first day back. People have been away for quite some time. And so I want to encourage that we have an open rule, because I'm not sure everybody knew what the schedule was going to be in advance, because they were all over the country. And I just say one final thing. I mean, with all the challenges that we face in this country and all the things that we need to be doing, it is a little bit disappointing to me is that this is the first thing out of the box. And I hope that before we adjourn for the campaign, which I know you guys want to adjourn as quickly as possible, that maybe we can do something about jobs and helping people who are struggling, and perhaps take up President Obama's jobs package would be a nice change of pace, so we can actually do something before we go to the election. So I'll encourage an open rule.
Well, thank you very much, and let me just say, as you know, we've been able to pass and send to the President several jobs bills. We have other initiatives that have come forward. We just are looking forward to reporting out the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act extension, and we'll have the continuing resolution a day after tomorrow that we're going to be considering in this committee. So I know with the 9% approval the United States Congress has, people do not believe that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but the fact of the matter is there are a wide range of issues that we're addressing, and this just happens to be one of them. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions.
Mr. Bishop, welcome. How are you? I'm well. It's nice to see you. Welcome back. Any questions? No. Why do you need the microphone to say no?
I just want you to know that I put 4 hours and watched the Zac Efron movie, be here with you.
Oh, good. Well, we can get that on DVD for you. Or
I'm really proud that you actually have a bill up here that's actually going to help school kids.
Good.
Teacher, it's about time. They've been waiting long enough to get those land exchanged. Good for you.
truer words have never been spoken. You're an old teacher. Exactly. Mr. Polis.
Yeah, a question. How much money for public education do we expect this bill to generate?
I'm not sure what it is, but there was a rebuttal to the Minnesota Star Tribune by a Democrat legislator that apparently takes their article, which is opposed to this, to task by saying there's a significant amount of money, and if I can find it here real quick, is well over $1 million, for example, in the Twin Cities area. 12 million is what I'm just advised.
Is how much this bill will generate for public schools?
Yeah. Okay.
Because
keep in mind, there's a bigger principle here though, that I probably didn't make clear, and that is in the Enabling Act, i.e., when as I understand it, when Minnesota became a state, there were certain lands that were set aside for public education.
Yeah.
When the Boundary Waters Canoe Act wilderness area was put in place, it took that land completely out with no exchange. What this attempts to do then is to address that so you have the same amount of land funding public.
Well, we're Western State, Colorado as well. You know, Section 16 also designated for our school trust lands, and I don't know if it's analogous to Minnesota. I don't know how you even begin to write, inequities in this whole scheme, and why are we focused on this particular one. For instance, in Colorado, in much of the Rocky Mountains, the Rocky Mountain part, the western part of our state, there was no Section 16 that was reserved. We also didn't get a Section 16 on tribal land in Colorado, and so we got additional land for the school land trust in the eastern part of the state, which has less mineral resources than the western part of the state. So again, there's all who's been done, has been done. We as well have an Enabling Act. We as well as school land trust, and we're familiar with it. It is my understanding, however, that there's millions of acres of school trust land in Minnesota, as there is in Colorado, over 3 million acres. And Minnesota currently produces, the millions of acres produce about $26 per student and it seems de minimis, perhaps even a rounding error, what effect an additional 86,000 acres could have. Colorado actually amended at the state level our own constitution to require a set-aside of lands within the school land trust to preserve some of our wild treasures and valuable areas. And we too are looking at increasing the income production from our other areas. I don't know how you go back though and again change what has always been the case, requiring renegotiations with everybody. I mean, just to think of what if we were to reopen this in Colorado, talking to all 5 of our Native American tribes, the Eastern Plains, the Western Slope. Why now? If it's de minimis for public education, what is the possible justification for kind of bypassing the normal process and immediately bringing this bill to the floor upon our return?
Well, I don't know that. I mean, if you say immediately bringing it, we had a full hearing on this issue. I think this came out of Mr. Bishop's subcommittee. And then we had a markup, and we went through regular order on this. But I just want to repeat the point. When a wilderness area was created, it took acres out of constitutionally designated public school land. And this simply has local support. It clearly has statewide support by the fact that the legislature passed legislation. Now, I can understand people have different views. Don't misunderstand that. But from our point of view, and I'll be first to admit, I've been a critic of wilderness. You've heard me say that in front of this committee before. But when you have something, this rights what I think was probably a wrong when that area was made. There's nothing more complicated to me than that.
Now, again, and we've had this discussion, I know about wilderness. I do have a wilderness bill that's supported by the counties. The counties asked for it, supported by the business community, the largest employer, over 200 small businesses, and supported by the municipalities that are closest to the wilderness areas. And it does not designate any of our school trust land as wilderness. I wonder if the gentleman would be open to considering a hearing in his committee on the Summit-Eagle County Wilderness Bill.
As you and I have spoken privately, I am open if some people, and I will say this, are foolish enough to want wilderness, I am open to having a discussion with them. Now, I will say that coming from my point of view, but I do believe, because I have seen this pattern over time, that when we designate certain lands off limits, they tend to grow like topsy, even though they're not supposed to. Now, if there's going to be, if we're going to have these designations in the future, I think there ought to be some restrictions on that. And I know Mr. Bishop and I have had discussions on that sort of activity. But that's my view on wilderness. Again, this bill corrects what I think was something that should have been corrected when the bill was passed in the first place, and it wasn't.
Well, and again, in Colorado, I feel that we've received several injustices with regards to the treatment of the school trust lands and the failure to grant Section 16 in many of our mountainous areas and inadequate trade thereof. Nothing to do with wilderness. But again, I would hope that we're not simply trying to address one injustice that perhaps might have occurred because of wilderness, but we're open to a wider variety of injustices that occurred with regard to the naval acts in our state. I'll yield to the gentlelady from Minnesota.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the panel, this is not about fixing an injustice. The state of Minnesota has agreed on selling lands. They have agreed on selling and exchanging lands. They've agreed on selling and exchanging lands. What this bill does is it takes away the second step where we look at the parcels of land, we come to make sure there's a fair appraisal on behalf of the state of Minnesota, a fair appraisal on behalf of the citizens of the United States. We make sure that treaty rights and treaty obligations are fully vetted and fully respected with the tribes at the table as the parcels that are going to be exchanged and be sold are put on a map. The second thing that this bill does is there's no map, there's no clear appraisal process that's signed off by the citizens of Minnesota, and when you don't have a map, there are hunting and fishing groups that are very concerned that public access that's currently enjoyed by citizens of the United States and residents of the Minnesota may or may not be cut off. So I want to be, I agree with the chairman that we need to move forward on a process. And the state of Minnesota came forward on a process. What this legislation does is it doesn't do the second process for the state of Minnesota, which already has a plan in place, which included consultation with the tribes. Therefore, I just came with the tribes issue, but I want to be clear. This is not undoing a wrong. The state of Minnesota has undone the wrong. I served with Representative Rukavina before I was elected to Congress. He's a fighter. He's a Democrat for the area. We came to the conclusion that we needed to do right. The state's doing right, but it does take away the transparency and the openness for the state to have a discussion on what the maps are going to look like. And thank you, Mr.
As a follow-up question, yes, to the gentleman from Minnesota, just to follow up. So you see this as a unwarranted federal intrusion on a state process that is still occurring? Is that what, would that characterize?
I hope that we recognize the nation-to-nation obligation by passing the amendment that I brought forward on behalf of the three tribal nations. But as a resident of Minnesota, I want to see a map before I vote on a final outcome.
If I may just comment, and just think back, and now we kind of get all complicated in our discussion, but if the wilderness area was not designated, we would not be having this discussion. But the wilderness area was designated, so now we're having this discussion. I think that's the proper way to look at it. I understand there are differences trying to move forward, but if you didn't have that wilderness area designated, there would be no discussion.
Thanks to the three of you for being here. Thank you.
All right.
The gentleman from Dallas. Thank you very much, Betty.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 5544, the Minnesota Educational Investment and Employment Act, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Natural Resources. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 112-30 as modified by the report print in Part A of the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amendment shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amendment. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order. Printed report may be offered only by a member designated. The report shall be considered as read. Shall be debatable for time specified in the report. Equally divided and controlled by a proponent and a non-opponent. Shall not be subject to the amendment. Shall not be subject to amendment for the division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part B of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. The rule also provides for the consideration of H.R. 5949, the FISA Amendment Act, Reauthorization Act of 2012, under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate with 40 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Judiciary, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of substitute recommended by the Committee on Judiciary now printed bill shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amendment shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions of the bill as amended. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instruction.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Let me explain briefly. As I said, I'm going to encourage us to make all of the Democratic amendments in order that have been submitted. We're going to, in the rule, self-execute the CBO question, which the chairman has in his manager's amendment. And then, of course, the FISA extension is a clean extension. We're going to continue to encourage as much oversight on that issue. And I think in light of that, it should be pretty straightforward. Are there any amendments? I know Mr. Mr. McGovern has indicated he wants to support an open rule for this.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 5544 and H.R. 5949 each an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to these bills on the floor.
Vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say
Aye.
aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. There are further amendments. Mr. McGovern.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendments to H.R. 5949 by Mr. Conyers, Ms. Schakowsky, and Mr. Holt, number 2, which would change the bill from a 5-year extension to a 3-year extension.
You've heard the motion, gentlemen. Let me just say again that this 5-year extension is done at the request of President Obama, and it had strong bipartisan support coming out of the committees, so I'd encourage you to vote. The vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Noes have it. Any further amendments? Mr. No, Mr. No. And Ms. Slaughter's not here, so. The vote now occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions.
Aye.
Mr. Sessions, aye. Ms. Fox. Aye. Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Woodall. Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent. Aye. Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Scott. Aye. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Slaughter. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings.
No.
Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis.
No.
Polis, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
And Mr. Clerk, the total?
9 yeas and 3 nays.
And the motion's agreed to, and this will be...
Or 8, excuse me, 8.
I'm not responsible for correcting you. I mean, they told me behind here that I should, so you want to, why don't you repeat the totals now for us?
8 yeas, 3 nays.
Okay. And the...
Getting closer.
was agreed to. Getting a little closer there. And this will be managed for the majority by Sheriff Nugent.
And for the minority by Mr. Polis.
Mr. Polis. And thank you. We're going to meet at 3 o'clock Wednesday afternoon on the sequester, Solyndra, and the continuing resolution. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.